Thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Write Project podcast and radio program. This is a show about writing and modern Newfoundland author culture. This program is produced and recorded at CHMR FM 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and is aired on other great stations in the province and elsewhere in the country. It can also be heard online at www.chmr.ca. I'm your host, Matthew LeDrew, author of the Coral Beach Case Files series and founder at Engine Book. Let's see what we have today. Welcome to a special episode of the Write Project podcast. We're here. I know I say every episode is special, but this one really is. We're here with Brad Dunne. He is the author of many amazing books and stories, as well as an editor and just all around jack of all trades lit fiction person. He wrote After Dark Vapors a few years ago, and last year wrote The Gut. He's got a new book coming out about a haunted house in Newfoundland, I believe. But thank you for coming on the Write Project podcast, Brad.
Good to be back.
Good to be back. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Brad's going to be answering some questions for us later, which means you guys will hear this in 30-minute segments, but it'll have been 10 hours because that's the way questions with Brad work. Brad, tell us about your new book. What's it called, first of all?
My new book is called The Merchant's Mansion. It's, as you said, a haunted house. Well, I try to put a little twist on it, but basically it's a haunted house set in Outport, Newfoundland. And the premise is that a young man, Nick O'Keefe, his parents buy a house called the Merchant's Mansion as a retirement project. They're going to build it up to be like a B&B. Weird things start happening. He investigates, finds out there's a malevolent entity possessing the house and possessing his parents. So he's got to get to the bottom of it and save his parents.
Nice. What was what made you decide to start writing that? What was the impetus behind it?
Like pretty much all my ideas, it's sort of like you file things away where it's like, I'd love to write about X. I'd love to write about werewolves. I'd love to write about Lovecraftian noir, and haunted house is one of the things on the horror list that is a great trope that people like to come back to. And some of my favorite books are The Shining, Haunting of Hill House, and obviously lots of movies and to follow the House of Usher and all that kind of good stuff. So finding basically you file that away as like kind of a Santa's wish list that you'd like to do one day, and then next thing you know, you're sitting down and an idea just strikes you like, oh, what if I set it in rural Newfoundland, and it's and I'm also interested in kind of the history of merchants and the power dynamic in Outport, Newfoundland. So something just clicks in your brain, and these interests coalesce, and next thing you know, an idea for a story takes off, and then it's just a matter of getting it down on paper.
That is an amazing moment, and I've experienced the same, where like you file one thing away and it's not a story yet. It's just someday, and then it's like several ideas are just bopping around your head and they all collide together and form into something you could do something with. It's a great feeling.
Yeah, a lot of authors have different ways of like using different analogies to explain it. I think Stephen King calls it like he puts it down to the guys downstairs. That he sees them as kind of this like work crew that work on it while he's not thinking about it, kind of the subconscious. I think of it as like kind of like a fermentation process where like you kind of you put something in a jar and you put it down in the basement somewhere, and then you let it just kind of ferment, and then you come back to it and you're like, oh, this would go really well with this other ingredient I've been dry aging. You mix it all together and you got a stew, baby.
You got a stew. What's a stew baby? Is it like a child born from a stew? What's
Did you ever watch Arrested Development?
I did not.
Oh, that's well, I won't explain the joke. It's not funny when you explain jokes, but
Okay.
it's a reference to Arrested Development.
Okay. All right. Stew baby. I like it. Um, cool. That sounds like a really cool project. So you are one of the people working on a multi-author project coming up. I don't think we talked about it a ton on the show, but it's also not a secret. The Spire project. Is this book part of that, or is it wholly by itself?
Oh, Spear.
Yes,
No,
Sphere, sorry.
this is standalone.
Cool. Awesome. Awesome, blossom. Didn't want any of the others' dirty paws anywhere near this. I understand. I understand. Yep. Haunted house stories are great, and especially like you said, the Haunting of Hill House and all those stuff. That was one of the ones you mentioned. They're really like coming into a bit of a renaissance lately. There was a bit of a lull in them for a while. I find the horror genre has these like giant peaks and valleys of like reinvigorate. All genres do, but like it's really noticeable in horror where it's like something comes along to revolutionize that's really new, and then everything that comes afterwards, and we get down into the valley, and then something new comes along again.
Yeah, absolutely. It's well, that's kind of the genius of tropes is that they become reinvented uh in each generation, bring something new to it. So like, when Stephen King wrote The Shining, it was like, he didn't want to write about Gothic mansions in Europe. He wanted to write about a hotel in America, and the idea that a hotel can have multiple ghosts, and it's almost like a battery that absorbs bad energy and negative energy and kind of stores it. Um, and now, like he kind of had the built on an Indian burial ground, which hasn't aged well, but I think definitely he doesn't really get enough credit for this, but he really did reinvent the idea of the classic Gothic haunted house. And obviously he borrowed a lot from Shirley Jackson, but I think the idea of the modern haunted house has a lot of depth to The Shining.
Yeah, big time. Big time it does. I have a weird question about The Shining. Again, the not aged well, like Indian burial ground thing that you were saying. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like in the movie, that's not like gospel. Like that's not the narrator saying it is true. That's this hotel clerk saying it. Was it the same way in the movie? Because like you could easily make the argument that like that was just that hotel clerk being a douchebag. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's made offhand in the book too, and I think in Doctor Sleep, the sequel, he gets a bit more into why certain places, attract these negative. I mean, Stephen King obviously expanded his universe between 1975 and 2015 when he wrote Doctor Sleep or wherever he did. So by Doctor Sleep, it seemed like there was a much more sense of the metaphysics of his world and how his magic systems, and a bit more about just there are bad places that attract bad entities, and the hotel was one of them. I think he kind of, like maybe retconned that a bit and felt like, I don't really like the whole Indian burial ground thing anymore, and I'm just going to try and find a different way to explain it.
Which fair. You know what? Fair. Yep. Definitely a good choice, I think, on his part with that one. Come to think of it, I mean, that was kind of the same thing with 1408. Like when now you're saying it, like, oh, it's just like certain places attract evil, the like certain hotels attract evil, something like that. It never really occurred to me before, but like he reused a lot of that, or like not or expanded upon it in some ways in 1408. I wonder if they're set in the same world as much as anything is with him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, he definitely circles around ideas like why are things haunted? Like, Christine, a car is haunted.
Yeah.
And he kind of gets into the weeds of that a little bit, to varying degrees of success. But I think he is very interested in that idea of, um, and this kind of becomes a meme, like Family Guy, like, oh, what if the lamp was haunted, right? And that's kind of something that he comes back to. But I think it is interesting because I think it's a commentary on how we attach meaning to inanimate objects, and how places where bad things have happened, the trace, the stain of that legacy remains. And while, oh, a spooky hotel was built on an Indian burial ground is distasteful by our standards, I think too he is trying to articulate about the legacy of colonialism.
Yeah.
And I think he is, although not always successful, is very interested in the dark legacy of, uh, well, America. But I don't want to seem like a Canadian dunking on Americans, because Canada is just as guilty of colonialism as the States. So let's just say, like, North America.
Sure.
And that's something that comes up a lot in his books. Pet Cemetery. There's the idea that, I think it's the Mi'kmaq in New England. They left this area that where they have their house. They say the ground is sour, and he draws on the, I forget the monster in that book now. John Dobbin wrote about it.
The Wendigo.
Yeah, so the Wendigo is in Pet Cemetery, and the idea of, the land has been soured, and how the land retains, this history that, we don't. I mean, back then, especially, writing in the 70s was definitely not something that was brought up a lot. And again, it has stuff about the legacy, and I think he doesn't get enough credit, um, in how he has married that idea to horror, which I think is very interesting. The idea of, history as horror, and horror as something that we don't like to think about, and, we've tried to kind of compartmentalize, and it's almost like the return of the repressed.
Yeah.
And here it's bubbling up, and it's like, we don't want to think about all the Indians we murdered, we don't want to think about the land that we stole from them, and blah blah blah. But I think he really recognizes that as like the source of discomfort, which is what makes, which gives it that juice.
It's really interesting that you mentioned, like I can almost see the metaphor now when I'm talking to you in a lot of his work, but like that the object is haunted by, like, this thing that's inanimate and does, is not sentient, is tainted by this act of evil. You could easily make an argument that he's making a comment about North America. You know what I mean? Like that, like, we're never gonna get out of this original sin. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, like, the things leave a trace, and he's definitely, his instinct as a storyteller is to kind of like scratch at that trace, and bring it to light.
For sure. Awesome. Brad Dunne, what is your favorite and least favorite Stephen King novel, and why for each?
I'm gonna say, for my favorite, I'll say It. It was the first book of his that I read. It really kind of set the path for me for wanting to write horror. Uh, it really blew my mind, because I felt like you weren't allowed to write that kind of stuff. Not just the infamous scene at the end with the children, but like the violence in it up until that point. My parents were very strict in what I was allowed to watch and listen to in terms of music. So, I wasn't allowed to watch Silence of the Lambs, but I could read the book. And, I wasn't allowed to listen to Wu-Tang Clan. So I had to kind of keep
But you
that
could
stuff
read the book.
secret. Yeah, and so like they're like, okay, well, he's reading the book. He's not playing video games, and so that's okay. But all the sex and violence is in the book or
Yeah.
in the books. But it's funny how we seem to uh I was talking to somebody about this the other day, but it's like books have managed to escape the rating system.
Yep.
So like movies, very tightly regulated, G, PG, PG-13, R, X-rated, blah, blah, blah. Music, if there's too much lewd content, you get slapped with the parental advisory. But books, they seem to be sacred. No one seems to want to touch them. And I would say, if you're a super concerned parent, that's where all the good stuff is.
Yeah. Don't tell them that though. Like the
Yeah.
headline's going to be Brad Dunne advocates for rating system on books, and nobody wants that.
And I guess for my least favorite Stephen King book, I gotta say, I'm gonna say Cujo as a bit of a hot take.
Really?
I found that book just like miserable to read. I'm a dog lover, but it's not necessarily because poor dog.
Yeah.
Gets it bad, but just like it's just a miserable book. Apparently, he didn't even remember writing it because he was so drunk.
Oh no, not drunk, not drunk.
Well, that's what he claims. But I mean, he's been very open about all his substance abuse. But and also, there's just like one thing that drives me nuts about Stephen King sometimes is that he likes to really show off that he's done his homework on certain things. And I know you love Bag of Bones. I find with Bag of Bones, it's like he must have clearly talked to lawyers because there's a lot of stuff about like a custody battle. There's like a subplot around a custody battle. I feel goes nowhere in that book. And in Cujo, he must have talked to copywriters and advertisers because there's this big subplot about the husband, the father husband of the wife and child who do get caught in the car. And the reason why he's not there is he's trying to save his advertising agency. And there's just like this massive subplot where like the kid and the mom will be stuck in the car, and then cut to him in a boardroom trying to like salvage a cereal campaign. And I'm just like, what are you doing, man?
Like, oh my God, I forgot that. I blocked that out.
Put down the bottle and like
yeah,
go back to where the story is. Yeah, like
yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, I forgot that he does do that. Like I feel like sometimes like no one can edit King. Like King's too big. But he was always like it. But like no one has the balls, no publisher has the balls to sit down and go like, why is this here, Stephen? Please.
Yeah.
Why is this here?
At this point, he'd left. So like his first couple books were with Doubleday.
Yep.
And then he left Doubleday to go to Viking. And Viking were they really understood his appeal, and they really like turned him into like a blockbuster author. And obviously King in the 80s was like just absolutely massive. And so like, yeah, they probably just either they were too afraid to edit him, or they were too afraid to mess with the formula. It's almost like, well, he's just selling these books like crazy. Just like, if it works, don't fix it, right? Like, don't fix what's not broken. And
yep.
I guess they were just afraid that they would break the magic by trying to edit some of these things. And I'm sure like there's definitely some ego involved as well. But yeah, for sure, like Cujo, if Cujo had been like a novella, and he cut down a lot of the subplots, then I think it would be great. But otherwise, yeah, it's just, I mean, there's even a part like where he man for a chapter and we never encounter him again. But the thing about the postman is that he's got stomach problems and he's constantly farting. And it's just like, what are you doing, man? Like,
Yeah.
you're a grown man at this point. You have children. Why are you making fart jokes? Like,
Yeah.
give me a break.
They're not even jokes. It's just reality. Like it's not like there's a punchline. I gotta say the one book that suits King the most, like I don't know that it's my favorite, but it's definitely one of my favorites, is Needful Things. Like
Mm.
because it's so about the community and how like they all have secrets and they're all like getting worse and worse as time goes on, kind of thing. All the cutaways make sense because you're cutting the real main character is the community, and so like you're cutting away to other people in the community. So it's the rare book where his like cutaway bull makes a lot of sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, he does that effectively in like Salem's Lot, also It, in terms of getting into the bones of the community. And like his great strength and weakness is that he's so unchained, just like he just puts it on paper. Like he doesn't filter himself. He just lays it all out there. And when it works, it's just like it's like he's surfing, like just this crazy wave that he stays on top of. And when it doesn't work, it's it's a usually when it doesn't work, it's like descends into toilet humor and just
Madness.
nonsense that goes nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll never forget Tommy Knockers. Tommy Knockers was it for me. And he admitted like there was a lot of cocaine during Tommy Knockers, but like it's so banana. Like I could take a pen, a red pen, and cut 2/3 of that book. Like just let's introduce a character that's not useful to the plot, but let's spend 18 to 20 chapters diving into their history and where they were before the start of the book. And I'm like, a chapter's a lot. A few scenes, just a tangent, sure. A scene, acceptable. 18 to 20 chapters on just a character that doesn't affect the plot at all? What are you doing?
Yeah, he got sober after that book, actually.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
what's funny is that like, so Tommy Knockers is kind of like the the pinnacle of his excess.
Yeah.
But before that, he wrote uh, Misery, which I think is one of his best books, and
Yeah.
is like, you know, very short by his standards. It's only like 300 pages or so. So like very tight book, very disciplined, very effective, and he goes from that to Tommy Knocker. So the 80s were just a wild time for him.
Yeah. Yeah. To be fair, it was the 80s. Like
Yeah.
it's not like he was off brand for the decade.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Brad. In your opinion, what are important magazines or podcasts or whatever for writers to listen to, read, subscribe to, however you want to phrase it?
Well, I love in terms of like writer specific podcasts, I really like Writing Excuses. It's
Really?
Brandon Sanderson's podcast. And what's funny, I'm not like a big fan of his writing itself. But I think that he's one of my biggest influences, despite the fact that I don't really read his stuff, because I find the material he has about writing between his podcasts, his YouTube stuff, he's just very insightful. And I think his ideas about like magic systems, world building, all that is just brilliant. Like he's a great teacher, explains everything really well. So like even if you're not a high fantasy reader, or you just feel like, man, Brandon Sanderson is not my type of author, still check out like his podcast and his YouTube stuff, because um, he is very insightful. Um, I also really like the Losers Club, which is about Stephen King. Uh, they go through his work chronologically and just kind of discuss his books, and it's a really great in-depth discussion. If you love King, then it's a great way to um, learn more about him and just dig into that. If you're not a big fan, you're just like, well, I like a couple of his books. It's a great, if you like, I don't know, you're like, oh, I only really read The Shining or Pet Cemetery. and I enjoy those. But just check out those episodes because it's a lot of fun and great way to dive into the background of these books. In terms of magazines, I'm a big and also other podcasts. I just love general interest. Like today, I was getting a tattoo, and for 2.5 hours, me and the artist listened to a podcast about possums and the biology of possums, the history of possums in America. And I just think that if you're going to be a writer, you have to have you have to cast a wide net in terms of what you're accumulating, because you don't know how that's going to materialize into your book, right? Like I learned today that possums have an average of 13 nipples.
Wow.
For feeding their young. I mean, that's crazy. And there's some other physiological aspects that I won't get into because it's a bit graphic. But if you're a sci-fi writer and you're trying to come up with aliens and lore for different creatures, then you probably should be studying some biology, just listening to podcasts about science and how that can inform your work, even if you're not a science fiction writer. Again, anything that can strike your interest. For example, like the gut, I had always wanted to write a Lovecraftian noir. I'd always wanted to explore the sociological aspect of crime in a kind of LA noir type setting. But I never could really make that idea into a story. And then I read a book called Ghetto Side by Jill Lepore, I think the author's name is. Yeah. Anyways, I read the book just because I was curious about it, and it was about the way certain police practices in LA create environments for homicide and gang activity, like Compton, and it just boom, made that connection with the Lovecraftian noir, and so I got this idea for the gut. And so I think it's Steve Jobs who said that you should always follow your curiosity because you don't know how those constellations are going to connect. And he talked about when he dropped out of Stanford, he took a calligraphy course just because he was interested in it, and he didn't have to worry about student credits or whether it counted towards his degree or not. And he learned calligraphy just because he thought it was cool. And then when it was time to design the Apple, he used his knowledge of calligraphy to, design different kind of fonts, which was the first time that had appeared in a word processor. I don't know much about computers, but that's what he said. And, so like I said, if in terms of magazines and podcasts, just let your curiosity guide you, and don't worry too much immediately how is this research related to what I'm writing about, because I think those unexpected happy accident connections are the gold of creating something new and different that gives you an edge and gives you a voice that's unique.
Yeah, exactly, for sure. I used to say that about MUN courses. They were so affordable that I used to say anything that interests you in the slightest, the best course you could take as a writer is just something that interests you and learn more about it. Take all the intro courses that interest you and just get more knowledge and get more information that you can use in your writing. I use the stuff that I learned in anthropology and sociology way more than in any writing course.
Yeah.
The Merchant's Mansion will be available in early 2022 from Engine Books. Keep your eye out for more of information for it soon. Thank you once again for coming on, Brad Dunne.
My pleasure.
All right, well, thanks for coming on again. For all of you, we'll be here again next week at 4:30 Newfoundland time or online at chmr.ca. Please tune in and we'll talk more about writing culture in Newfoundland.